Difficult conversations are always going to be a part of people management simply because we're managing people. In this video though, I'm going to give you some hints and tips that will make those conversations a little bit easier. Hello, my name's Jenefer. I'm the founder of Silk Helix and we're a HR consultancy specialising in neurodiversity. And of course, difficult conversations include things like having sensitive conversations around neurodivergent conditions, as well as the dealing with conflict, performance management issues that come up every day when we're managing people. So let's dive in. How can we make those conversations easier? Now, I have heard people say difficult conversations are only difficult because we feel that they are difficult. Just change your mindset. Tell yourself they're not difficult and they won't be difficult. I call absolute rubbish on that advice. I think there will always be difficult conversations. And yes, what one of us finds difficult, somebody else might not. But that doesn't mean to say we don't find things difficult. And there are not tools and techniques we can use to make them a bit easier. So I'm going to give you my tools and techniques today so that you can make those conversations just that bit easier. Number one, firstly, preparation. Absolutely key is to prepare. When people come to me for HR advice and they're kind of not really sure how to deal with something, often if I look at something and go, I'm not really sure how to deal with this either, the first thing I can identify is I don't have enough facts. When we know the facts, when we've got the full situation in front of us, it's so much easier to plan and have that conversation. So make sure that you've got all of that information. And if you haven't, then the conversation needs to start with a fact-finding exercise. And some of that conversation should be thinking about other people's perspectives as well, because that's part of the facts of the situation, different people's perspectives. And also as part of your preparation, be prepared to consider those different perspectives and adapt your communication style. I think when we've thought all of these things through and we've thought about what does the individual needs that I'm going to be speaking to in terms of communication style, what is all the facts, what is the potential perspectives that could come up in this conversation, it's going to be a whole lot easier to deal with. And that's when we can kind of break down what we've got to deal with and face it head on. The second thing you absolutely need in order to have these conversations is a safe environment. And there's two sides to this safe environment. There is the individual meeting, so making sure that you've selected a location which is confidential, where somebody will feel safe to speak, whether that's remote or face-to-face, making sure that you've considered any sensory or communication needs of the individual and how that may impact their feeling of safety in the room, so that you can encourage open dialogue, because people aren't going to have open dialogue. They're not going to have a conversation with you if they don't feel safe. And the reality is, it doesn't matter what you do in that moment. If there is not a safe environment around it, if there's not a workplace culture where people can speak openly, feel safe to bring their authentic selves to work, then this conversation is going to be really hard. If these conversations don't happen very often, whether they're positive, negative, if feedback conversations, if open conversations, if challenging conversations don't happen on a regular basis, then this conversation is going to really come out of the blue. Particularly, let's say, a performance issue. If it's been going on for a long time and nobody said anything, or there's just been these kind of odd passive-aggressive comments, and now you're trying to tackle it, it's going to be really difficult to do that. So we really do need to think about that wider culture. How we manage people on a day-to-day basis is going to really impact how they feel when we bring them into a challenging conversation. Because bear in mind, if it's a difficult conversation for you, it's probably a difficult conversation for them as well. And this is where management training is so important, that every day, making sure your managers have got awareness of things like neurodiversity, but also the just general communication skills, how to deal with performance, how to deal with absence, how to tackle conflict within the team, because actually those things will ensure that most things are nipped in the bud early and we're having a lot less of the difficult conversations. Details are on screen now if you want to get in touch with me about management training, because it's something I can help you with. But anyway, let's move on to the next tip that I've got. How do we then handle that conversation? That conversation needs to be direct. Direct communication is absolutely essential. No hiding behind sort of metaphors and woolly language or oh, you come across lazy, that's a character assassination and of no use to anybody because it doesn't really tell us what we've done wrong. We need to be really direct. So we need to be focused on the behaviours. What is it that we're seeing somebody do or not do that we want or need to change? And be able to give examples of that. If you can't give specific examples of the behaviours that are of concern to you, you need to go back to that preparation stage. You need to work out what is going on here. Is this actually a judgment issue rather than a behaviour issue? Is there really the behaviours that support your judgment? Really good question to ask yourself to make sure that you're having the right conversations with the right people. And then we can have that direct communication. Check out my video on the AID model. It goes into step by step how to have this communication, how to prepare for it, how to be really specific and focus on solutions, not just criticism when you're having those conversations. Because again, that's really important. We've got to take something away that we can move forward with, not just walk out of the meeting feeling really rubbish about ourselves because we've just had this barrage of criticism. And that brings me on to my next point, which is really important. You cannot have these conversations without this one. It's listening. It can be really tempting to go into a difficult conversation and deliver a lecture. Because you've been thinking about this, you've kind of done your preparation, you know what needs to be said, you think you know what the facts are, what the situation is, and you want to get this over and done with. So you can come into kind of parent mode of just delivering a lecture and leaving somebody feeling really not heard, not listened to, not respected. All of these things that are quite negative and don't focus on, well, how do we move forward from this point? Or actually, we are both two adults here that can resolve this together. So making sure that you listen. So that direct communication is really important, but direct does not mean I am just going to tell you and you are going to listen to me. It means we're going to listen to each other. We're going to have clear communication together. Absolutely crucial, this one. And that helps to create that safe environment I talked about. So we've then got that cycle of encouraging these conversations because people feel that they are going to be heard. There is a way of being able to have these conversations, and it might just be that what you thought was happening wasn't quite the way you thought it was, and that will really change the conversation and how we move forward from it. Finally, don't forget to follow up. Make sure that you send an email, usually it's an email these days, that says, this is what we discussed. So you've got a recap. If either of you are then thinking, that's not what I thought was discussed, at least you've got something to go back to and correct it if perhaps the communication didn't quite go to plan. So it checks that understanding, it makes sure things are clear and make sure there's a record. I mean, for HR, we all like records. So if things go further, if performance gets worse, for example, and we need to deal with it formally, we've got a record there, which is always important. But it also means that you've got your action points detailed as well. So everybody knows, what do we expect to happen going forward out of this meeting? What do we expect to change? And that's also recorded. So you've got something you can go back to and follow up in future discussions as well, because really, we don't want to just be having this discussion and then dropping it, never to be sort of spoken about again. We want to make sure things do change and that we've got open conversation continuing. So that follow-up email is really important for that. And none of this needs to be, and shouldn't be, kind of draconian or micromanagement. It's around how we have this conversation. It's adult to adult. It's making sure that we're, as I say, listening, so important. Making sure that we're just using clear communication. That's not rude, it's not aggressive, it's just clear and direct without kind of trying to hide between things when we're having these conversations. Difficult conversations will always be a part of management. There is no escaping that, and it doesn't matter how experienced you are as a manager, there will be difficult conversations. Practice does make them easier. Culture, absolutely important, because when we've got open dialogue as just a normal part of our culture, a lot of these things won't escalate to the difficult conversations. So you'll definitely reduce your difficult conversations then. And of course, making sure that your managers have got appropriate training to deal with these things, so they know what they can do, they know what they can't do, they know what they should do, they know different ways they can adapt their styles to different situations. They've got the skills to create that culture that makes things easier to deal with. And it's that culture that is only going to come from your managers, because it's the everyday experience that creates the culture that people are experiencing whilst they're at work. If you want to talk to me about training your managers, check out the description below for more details. In the meantime, don't forget to like, subscribe, do all the things that helps our channel get more reach and more people see our videos. And I shall see you next week.